All right, friends, let's begin with this first question here in honor of Yom Yerushalayim, of Jerusalem Day, tonight and tomorrow. Question is as follows. The night of your Q&A this week will also be the night of Yom Yerushalayim. Indeed, it is the night. Tonight is the night of Yom Yerushalayim. So the question is, can you share with us why we celebrate this day and what message we can take home from this day? Okay, so let's get right into it. So Yom Yerushalayim technically is the day in which we were reunited with our holy city of Jerusalem after about 2,000 years. 53 years ago, as you all know, towards the end of the Six-Day War, I believe it was on the fourth day, finally the Israeli forces, the IDF, was able to conquer Jerusalem, push away the Jordanians, and enter into the holy city, to the walls of Jerusalem, to finally liberate not just the Western Wall, but also the whole Mount, Temple Mount, and then shout through the walkie-talkie, as we just mentioned now during the Arvit prayer, Har Abayit Beyadenu, the Temple Mount is in our hands. You can still listen to the recording until this very day. One of the recordings that is sure to shake the core of every Jew, because it speaks to the very, very core of our history and of our being as Jews, of the fabric, of the neshama, of the Jewish soul. So that's what technically happened, again, 53 years ago in 1967 on this very day. And thus we celebrate until today, each and every year, Yom Yerushalayim, Jerusalem Day, the day in which Jerusalem was returned to us, a day of tremendous miracles and a day of reunification between the Jew and his city, the city of Jerusalem. Now, on a deeper level, just to speak about Jerusalem, since this is part of the question too, what message can we take from this day? I'll mention two things. Number one, we just read this again, a beautiful midrash that says that Jerusalem is like the apple of God's eye. And then we also, that same midrash says that when a Jew looks into that apple of God's eye, he sees his reflection as a holy temple. A holy temple also belonging to the center of Jerusalem, to Temple Mount. Jerusalem is indeed, as mentioned, an integral part of the Jewish people and of the Jewish being. I think that's why when we go to Jerusalem, we feel a connection, whether we visited there before or have not. There's an intrinsic connection that is felt each and every time we go to Jerusalem. I can't tell you how many times I've met people, as I'm sure you have, who shared with me their experiences of going to the Western Wall, touching that holy wall, and something, not knowing how to describe that something. But that is again because when God created the Jew, he planted in him Jerusalem. And when he created Jerusalem, he planted in it the Jew. And there's that unbreakable connection between us and Jerusalem. If there is a home to the soul, there's a home to our body, right? And that's the homes you're in right now. That's the homes we usually live in. What's the home to the soul? The home to the soul is Jerusalem. That's really what Jerusalem is about, more mystically and spiritually speaking. But I wanna go further and take another message from this day. And I learned this message from two greats. The first chief rabbi of Israel, Rabbi Avraham Yitzchak Cohen Cook, and my dear rabbi, Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz. And may Hashem send him a full and speedy recovery. But Rabbi Avraham Cohen Cook was once asked, why is it that you want to return to Jerusalem so much? He lived 100 years ago, again, before the liberation of Jerusalem 53 years ago. So he was asked, why is it? What is it about you, the Jewish people, and the city of Jerusalem? And he explained, you don't understand. There are hearts made out of stones. We often encounter people like that. It's as if their heart is non-existent. It's made out of stones. But there are stones made out of hearts. Jerusalem for the Jewish people is not about just stones. It's about stones made out of hearts. When we go to Jerusalem, we feel the heart of the Jewish people palpating. We can sense it. That's what Jerusalem is about, and that's why we want to return there so badly.
Let's go.
Amen. Let's go tonight. Let's go.
Not stop from Vegas. Let's do it.
There you go.
I'm ready.
Now, Now, to take this idea even further, to quote my dear mentor, Rabbi Steinsaltz, I'll never forget, he can be very harsh, very to the point, very a sharp shooter. Doesn't beat around the bush. He'll tell you the truth as it is without covering it up. But I remember that, he goes to the old city. He used to go to the old city each and every Shabbat to his shul. He was appointed by the Lubavitcher Rebbe as the rabbi of the Tzemach Tzedek synagogue in the old city, one of the oldest synagogues in the old city. And each and every time that he would go, almost every Shabbat, he would be bothered by people. Oh, you Rabbi Steinsaltz, you the world scholar, can I ask you a question? Or can you come speak to my group? I have a group here from outside of Israel. And can you come speak to them? Sometimes he would say yes, sometimes he would say no. But I remember that there was a group of students, I would pray with him often. There was a group of students, I don't think it was birthright students, but certainly students from America. And they asked Rabbi Steinsaltz, can you come and speak to us? He spoke to them and he shared some brilliant gems, or as he calls them, pebbles. To me, they're gems and pearls. But at the very end of the talk, a student who was politicized, to say the least, asked Rabbi Steinsaltz a political question. And he said to him, look, this city that we're in right now, is a controversial city. It's a city with a lot of conflict. The Arabs say that they own it. The Jews say that they own it. The Christians say that they own it. It's a very divided city. What's your take, Rabbi Steinsaltz? What do you say about Jerusalem? And Rabbi Steinsaltz, without skipping a beat, said, that's not the question I asked. It must be the question you're asking, because you're asking it right now, but it's not the question I asked. I don't ask what I have to say about Jerusalem. I ask what Jerusalem has to say about me. And then he continued in a very harsh way again. I don't know if I would say this to a student like this, but he said, look, the stones that you're stepping on right now, my dear student, these are stones that Abraham walked on, that Isaac walked on, that Jacob walked on, that all of these greats of history walked on. And now all of a sudden, you're walking on them. How do you think the stones are feeling? They had Abraham, that Isaac, and all of a sudden they have you. What are the stones of Jerusalem saying about you? That's my question. What are they saying about me? It's not the state of Jerusalem, it's the state of our beings. And when we're in Jerusalem, we better behave in a way that the stones can come and celebrate us and say, oh, now I can see a resemblance of Abraham, a resemblance of Sarah, a resemblance of the greats that walked this city. That's how we ought to behave in Jerusalem. It's not about what I think of Jerusalem, it's about what Jerusalem thinks about me. So I would say that Yom Yerushalayim is a great day in which we celebrate Jerusalem, but it's also a day in which we have to ask that question. When we're in Jerusalem, or when we're connecting to Jerusalem now, either through our visits, hopefully very soon, our physical visits, or through our minds, we have to ask ourselves, what is Jerusalem thinking about us, about its people today? So that, and we hope we can answer that question effectively and in a proud way, so that when we do visit Jerusalem, the stones of Jerusalem will be shouting and saying, oh, I'm so happy. I feel the same feeling that I feel when Abraham walked on me and when Sarah walked on me, etc., so that we can return the glory of Jerusalem to its place and ensure that it receives the honor and the holiness that it so deserves. So that's Yom Yerushalayim. Okay. Next question. When I was reading last week's Parsha, last week's Torah portion, I was very bothered by the sentences below. And I'll quote the sentences. Can you please clarify? Okay, so the sentences, last week's Parsha was a Parsha of blessings and curses. The Chukotai. We find the enumeration of God's blessings if we follow his ways, and God forbid of his curses if we don't follow his ways. One of the curses, and this is what this is referring to, I'm reading it here in English, and that is, you shall eat the flesh of your sons, and the flesh of your daughters you shall eat. One of the most terrible curses. Now, I will say this, that the Ralbag, who was a 13th century French sage, who has a whole commentary on the Torah, I won't go into his biography, but he mentions on this verse that unfortunately this verse, as we know in history, was fulfilled. When during the times of the destruction of the first temple, and during the times of the destruction of the second temple, Jeremiah himself, that speaks about the destruction of the temple, speaks about how v'achlu nashim piryam, that women will eat their own babies, their fruits, but their own referring to their own babies. It's the highest level, as another commentary says, the highest level of starvation. It's one of the worst curses in this list of curses. That's what it's referring to. We are all, I think everyone is terribly bothered by this curse when we read it. But I will mention again two things. Number one, on a lighter note, I remember reading about a rabbi was called the Kedushat Tzion, Ben Zion Halberstam. Rabbi Ben Zion Halberstam was murdered by the Nazis in 1941. He was known as the second Bobover Rebbe. The Bobov Hasidim exists until today in New York. His only son continued the torch after the war and fought to expand this Hasidic dynasty, which is really a glorious one. But Ben Zion Halberstam, the second Bobover Rebbe, the Bobover Rebbe that was murdered by the Nazis, there was a commentary called Kedushat Zion, and it's a nice story where he had a good spin on this verse, on this curse, where he invited for Shabbat at the very last second his students to come to his home. And the students were supposed to stay home that Shabbat, and the parents had prepared food for them. But hearing that now they received an invitation from their great rabbi, they decided, you know what, goodbye parents, if you allow us, we're going to join our rabbi for Shabbat. As they sat down to eat, the rabbi said, you fulfilled one of the curses of the Torah in the portion of the Chukotai. They were all scared. What is the rabbi going to say? What, we fulfilled curses? What does this mean? And he says, yes, you fulfilled the curse of Chaltem, exactly this, that you shall eat the flesh of your sons, or you shall eat the meat of your sons, because your parents right now, because you left them at the very last second, are eating your meat. They prepared meat for you, and they're eating it. So that this curse can be fulfilled also in positive ways, not necessarily in negative ways. That's to put a nice and lighter spin on this verse. But I will quote again the person that I've quoted so many times, and the quote that I've quoted so many times, Rabbi Yekuti al Yehuda Halberstam, the Kloisenberg Rebbe, who himself, as we all know, mentioned many times, was a Holocaust survivor, and his own wife and his 11 children were murdered in the Holocaust, yet he came out with tremendous strength and rebuilt his dynasty and built a children's hospital in Jerusalem. A remarkable human being.
Netanya.
That's right, in Netanya, at the Laniado Hospital. But the first Shabbat, he was one of the first Shabbats. He was out of the concentration camp he was in. He was in a DP camp. Finally, after so many years of torture, the Torah reader went and read this portion. And when he came to the curses, he started reading the curses very softly, as is the custom. We read them softly because, of course, we even want to mention them, but we have to because we read in the Torah, so we mention them softly. But he, who was there, shouted hecher, hecher, which means he needed louder and louder. And he, the Torah reader didn't know what to do. The great rabbi is saying louder, fine. At the end of the service, they asked him, why did you say that he should read those curses louder? And he said, that's because I want God to hear that all of these curses were already fulfilled. It's enough already. It's enough. It's time for him to redeem us. And in a way, yes, we said that that specific curse and all of the other curses were fulfilled. This specific curse was fulfilled during the destruction of the first temple and the second temple. But it's enough already. God fulfilled them. It's time now for only blessings and for his ultimate redemption. That's that question. Next question. All right, I am definitely awaiting the Mashiach anxiously, and I've come to understand the idea and coming reality of Mashiach so much more through many of the questions that were asked and answered in this forum. However, if the coming of Mashiach heralds the resurrection of the dead, does that mean that the concept of human death is over? In other words, why would people die only to be resurrected if Mashiach is already here? What are the thoughts on this? Does the resurrection of the dead follow a specific order? The more righteous join here first, and then others. So to answer the first question here, is the concept of human death over when Mashiach comes? Yes. According to Maimonides, according to the prophets, yes. In fact, there is a prophecy that says, that death will be swallowed lanetzach, forever, and God will erase the tears of one's faces, from all faces. So death will be swallowed forever. Human death will not exist when Mashiach comes and when we reach that level of resurrection of the dead. Now, when does the resurrection of the dead exactly happen? When Mashiach comes? That's a good question. And you have different opinions. No one knows. Or maybe people know, I mean, the authors know through their Holy Spirit or through their Ruach HaKodesh or the prophecies. But there's different opinions. Maimonides is of the opinion that first Mashiach will come. All the Jews will be gathered in Jerusalem, will live for 40 years, and then the dead will be resurrected. Sorry, that's not Maimonides. That's yet another opinion that after 40 years, the resurrection of the dead will occur. Maimonides says that no, the resurrection of the dead will only come at the second stage of the ultimate redemption. We don't know when that second stage will happen. The first stage is a stage in which the world will continue to lead itself as it is. In other words, we'll continue to be using iPhones and Facebooks. We'll continue going to our work and doing our profession. We'll continue doing whatever we do today. It will just be a world of peace, a world of higher divine consciousness. The second stage is a stage already where we'll achieve such a high level of divine consciousness that maybe we won't be involved too much with the material world anymore. And he says that second stage is when the resurrection of the dead will happen. I will add a third opinion, and that's the opinion of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who's mentioned this many times. The Lubavitcher Rebbe said, yes, it says that the resurrection of the dead will only happen after 40 years, but those 40 years can very as well be 40 regaim, 40 moments, 40 minutes, 40 seconds. But it says 40 years, the Rebbe asked. And he said, yes, you're right. But Elijah the prophet will come and answer all the questions we've had until this point, and he'll answer this question too. But it could happen as quickly as possible also. In fact, it could very well be also that, according to one lone opinion, that the resurrection of the dead will first happen and then the coming of the Mashiach. So no one really knows. I say, like the Lubavitcher Rebbe says, let it all happen. The coming of Mashiach, the resurrection of the dead, and whatever order it happens in, but let it happen very quickly. And if we have questions about 40 years, the second stage, Mashiach, Eliyahu, Navi, Elijah the prophet will answer those questions. But that's to give you that answer on one foot. Okay.
Wow.
All right. Next question. So, dear Rabbi, I feel like our Torah has so many answers to the many questions that life poses. But when I try to share teachings of the Torah, especially with my children, they turn a deaf ear and they seem so uninterested. How can I influence them when they don't want to be influenced? It's a tough question. I suppose that you must have teenagers. So, because it reminds me of mine. But I'll say a few things. Number one, I'll say what the Gerer Rebbe, Rabbi Yitzchak Meir Alter, some 150 years ago, pointed out about the order of the verses in the Shema. It's interesting. Because the first paragraph of the Shema speaks about how we should inscribe God's words on our hearts. They should be on our hearts. And then it also says, "V'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam," and you shall teach them to your children, and they will speak those words. And the Gerer Rebbe points out something very powerful, very poignant. He says, "Look, listen to the order. First, those words of God should be inscribed in your heart. Only then, v'shinantam levanecha, can you teach them to your children. If you don't believe in them, you won't be able to teach them, no matter how much you say them. If they're not inscribed in your heart first, it won't go. It just won't be registered. And I think it's true not just for the words of the Torah, for any word. If you don't believe in an ideal, you won't be able to teach it either. You know, there was a Scottish philosopher by the name of David Hume, who was a complete atheist. And yet he would go to church each and every Sunday. And a friend of his asked him, David, you don't believe in God. Why do you go to church? Well, you anyway don't believe in what the priest has to say. And he answered, that's true. I don't believe in what the priest has to say. But the priest believes in what he says. And from time to time, it's good to hear someone who believes in what he says. Because when you believe in what you say, it resonates, it radiates. And I say that's rule number one in education. I'm not saying that you have not inscribed, whoever asked this question, it's confidential. But I'm not saying that whoever asked this question doesn't have the words of God inscribed in your heart. But I'm just saying it's something to take into consideration each and every time before we speak to our children. Number two, I also think that much of education depends on teachable moments. We can come to our children and say, hey, listen to what the Torah says here. Listen to what Jewish law guides us to do here. But if they are not open to it at that moment, if they are not receptive, you can speak all you want. It will not only fall on deaf ears, but it will create some type of resistance. And therefore, I think as parents and as educators in general, even with our friends, you said, especially with your children, but with others too, right? I think we have to wait for those teachable moments. You know, there's a great story that I've also shared in the past, a long time ago, about the Lubavitcher Rebbe and the rabbi of a certain synagogue in, Rabbi Gordon was his name, Rabbi Yochanan Gordon in New Jersey. And the president of his synagogue did not keep kosher, and it bothered him very deeply that president of the synagogue doesn't keep kosher. Me, it doesn't bother. Not that our president doesn't keep kosher, but I'm just saying, we can't judge Jews. But it bothered him. And he wanted to say something, but he didn't know how, he didn't know what, and he felt that if he was going to say something, it wasn't going to be heard. So he went to the Lubavitcher Rebbe and asked for his advice. And the Holy Rebbe used a beautiful analogy. He said to him, Rabbi, have you ever been to a Russian sauna? Rabbi said, what does that have to do? Russian sauna? No, I haven't been to a Russian sauna. He says, anyone who's been to a Russian sauna knows that you go into the sauna and it's boiling hot and you come out sweating. And then there's someone there with usually a leaf, I think it's a fig leaf, that waits. And he asks you as soon as you come out, do you want to be slapped on your back? And most people say, yes, please slap me on my back. And there's a great feeling that comes from this, especially after you're all sweating. Now, that's what happens in the Russian sauna. He then tells the rabbi, if that person with the fig leaf would come to any of his clients in the middle of the street and start hitting them without having them go to the sauna first, just hitting them with the fig leaf, how would you think they would react? Oh, they'd be very upset, of course. If anyone would approach me with a fig leaf and hit me, I'd be upset. So the rabbi said, now you get the message. Before you say anything to someone, especially if you are going to rebuke them and criticize them, then make sure you are giving them the sauna feeling. You are enwrapping them with your love, with your warmth. And then when you'll hit them with the fig leaf, they'll say, give me more, give me more. They'll be open and receptive to it. So make sure that you create those teachable moments by giving them love and love. And then going to a baseball game with them, well, not that you can go to a baseball game today, but watching something, a baseball game on TV, fine. Or playing basketball with them, or whatever it may be that your children like to do. Create that love. And then you'll see in the middle of the game, your child will open up to you, and it will be the best opening for those teachings. I think that's rule number two. First, inscribe those words on your heart. And rule number two, wait for those teachable moments. And I would say number three, and last but not least, I think that, we also have to accept the fact that our children are their own beings. Yes, there are children, and certainly this is regarding our children. Everyone else, even our siblings or our friends, are their own beings. Everyone is different. And you might love someone so much and therefore expect from them so much, but 1 second, you forget that you also have to respect them and respect who they are. They are unique, they are different, they are our own and their spiritual journey, as we say here at CBT so many times. We respect everyone's journey, and as long as you're growing in your journey, you're good. So your children might not be up to the same level as you are, you think you are at least. So how about you give them You see life from their own lenses. See where they are. And then give them those little spoons. Feed them slowly but surely. Make them grow in their own way. I think that's another very important rule in education. I'll quote my rabbi again, Rabbi Steinsaltz, but I remember just before he stroked, by the way, I was butting heads with one of my children, I'll admit, and I'll say it, becoming a teenager, and I don't know what to do. And Rabbi Steinsaltz told me something so powerful, and he said, look, if you're going to fight on every little thing, what's going to happen is that you'll create an identity of resistance. I'm quoting word for word, said it in Hebrew. Zehut shel merida, that's what he said. An identity of resistance in your child. And then he'll see himself as a rebel. He'll see himself as someone who's fighting against everything you're trying to teach him. So sometimes you have to let it slide. Sometimes you say, I'm going to pick my fights. Sometimes you have to say, you know what? He's right now at his level. And I can't expect everything. And there's things that are between him and God, not between you and him. You're not God. And let him deal with God. Give him that independence. Don't allow him to create to develop that identity of resistance. See life as he sees life, not as you see life for him. And you'll see that then you'll bond better, you'll communicate better. So I would say that's education lesson number 3. All right. And this is the last question that was emailed to me. I see another question here via chat, which I'll relate to in just a few moments, but this is the last question. Shavuot is coming up next week. Are there any lessons you can share about this holiday? And the second question is, why do you think this holiday is not celebrated as much as Passover or other holidays are? It's a good question. Okay, so question number 1, are there any lessons you can share about this holiday? What is Shavuot? Shavuot is really the day in which we married God. And each and every day we renew our vows with God. That's what Shavuot is about. We spoke about this during our happiness hour this week. But that's the day when God came down on Mount Sinai. He proposed to us and he said, hey, can you marry me? Please marry me. All I'm asking is that you become a holy nation. You'll be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And we said, yes, we'll marry you. Na'aseh v'nishma. We will do and we will listen. And then God came and he gave us his marriage contract, his ketubah, which was the 10 commandments, the tablets, and then the Torah itself. And we married God. And that is also why, by the way, when we sinned and we cheated on God, so to speak, 40 days later, we went and we built a golden calf. If you remember the story right, Moses comes down from the mountain. What does he do? He breaks the tablets. What was Moses having a fit? Was Moses an angry man? Moses didn't know how to control his temper. What was he doing? No, what he was doing so brilliantly is he was taking our marriage contract and tearing it. So that if God came down and wanted to punish the Jewish people, Moses could say, they're not married to you. They're allowed to go to another woman, to another idol. And that's what he did. That's the love of Moses to the Jewish people caused him to tear that ketubah. When God said, where's my ketubah? I'll prove to you that you marry. It doesn't exist. But that's what Shavuot is about. It's about a marriage with God. That's what it's about. Now, that's why when we renew our vows each and every single year, we have to ask ourselves, how can we enhance this commitment to God, this bond, this relationship? How can I take one step closer to God himself, to my spouse, to my husband, so to speak? As we, as the Jewish people, are called the wife, God is called the husband. How can I reinforce, as we do each and every anniversary, the hope we do, how can I better my marriage? How can I further and deepen it? We have to do that on Shavuot. How can I be a better ambassador of God in this world? That's the question that trumps from the holiday of Shavuot. I think also that it's also a time in which we have to ask ourselves, since we receive the Torah on this day, how can we enhance our connection with the Torah? Maybe study more. Maybe take upon ourselves some daily study that we don't have until today. Maybe we can learn, the each and every portion of the week is divided into 7, because you have 7 aliyahs. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe famously said that therefore one should study 1 portion a day for the 7 days of the week. So maybe that's something to take upon ourselves. And I will remind everyone what the Kotzker Rebbe says, Rabbi Menachem Morgenstern, that this day is called the day of Matan Torah, of the giving of the Torah, even though it's the day when we receive the Torah. Why is it called the day of the giving of the Torah? And that's because God gave us the Torah, but we have to receive the Torah every day anew. The receiving is never complete. We have to be able to, therefore, recommit ourselves to the receiving of the Torah on Shavuot. Ask ourselves, how am I going to receive it today more than yesterday and less than tomorrow? That's the main message of Shavuot. Now, you ask a good question. Why do you think this holiday is not celebrated as much as Passover, other holidays? I have no scientific answer to this. I have my own theories. One theory is because Shavuot doesn't demand much of man. On Passover, we scrub and clean our homes for a whole month. And when there's pain, there's gain. When there's no pain, there's no gain. On Shavuot, there's not much pain to prepare for the holiday. What's the pain? To make a cheesecake. What else? Not much pain. You have to go and run and build a sukkah and buy the 4 species. Not much pain. So not much pain, not much gain. That's one theory I have. Another theory I have is because it's a demanding holiday, much more than the other holidays. Again, we have to renew our vows, and we shy away from it. Are we ready? It's not a joke. That's why we stay up all night as a sign of utter commitment. Yes, God, we committed to you. We so anticipate our renewal of vows that we're gonna be there all night, not being able to fall asleep and studying your Torah. It's not an easy feat, not at all. So people shy away from it, and as they would shy away from anything that would shake their comfort. So that might be another reason, and I'm open to hearing your theories about this too. I want to relate, before we open this up completely, I want to relate to just one more question that is asked here on this chat. Hello, Rabbi. It's a big question. I'm looking for suggestion in preemptive behavior with my children. How can I teach them? Really, I don't quite get it, of others, but also not telling a friend what another person said about them. How can I teach them, I think, to rely on others? Okay, and I'm sorry, the question continues here. Teach or show them to avoid speaking poorly about others. How can I teach them or show them to avoid speaking poorly about others? And number 2, to not share and repeat a mean thing that was said with their friend. That's a good question. I think that we spoke about this a little bit last week, maybe a few weeks ago. But I think it goes down to the very core. I think we have to teach our children the power of this mouth right here, the power of a speech. Perhaps the most powerful organ in the whole body, that it can create sweetness, like we said, like a bee, right? That's why the word for speech and the word for bees is the same thing. Or it can create a sting. I think if we teach them the power of a mouth, then they'll be able to speak positively about others and avoid speaking negatively about others. And it will also teach them not to repeat mean things about their friends that other people have said. I would tell my children, I have said this to my own children, what the Talmud says, I think we said this during the happiness hour, and that is that the worst weapon in the world is not an AK-47, and it's not a tank, and it's not even an F-35 that can shoot, bombs drop bombs from the crazy angles. And it's not a B-52 that can penetrate the deepest bunkers in the world. What's the greatest weapon in the world? This right here. That's the greatest weapon in the world. Because bombs can kill you physically. This can kill you spiritually. Bombs can kill you for a limited amount of time. You have a world to come to go to. This can kill you for this world and the next world. That's how powerful this weapon is. If we teach our children to be therefore careful about this weapon, beyond teaching them about the energy that it creates, when we use positive words, it creates a positive energy and it comes back to us. When we use negative words, that negative energy comes and feeds us and comes back to us too. So I think that's the way to teach them how to speak positively about others and not negatively about them.